Well guys, it's a big hello here from the Newcastle United training ground, the New Look training ground. As you can see behind me, certainly still lots of building work taking place. Just popped in for a coffee actually, and it's looking really good inside. Certainly a huge improvement to what we saw under the last ownership at the football club. But I'm here inside today because it is transfer deadline day, but sadly for all you Newcastle United supporters, by the time you watch this you will know that there's nothing happening today. Very quiet on all fronts. The team and Eddie Howe left at 2 o'clock this afternoon to get their flight down to the south coast, of course, where they'll play Brighton tomorrow. That was just a few hours after we spoke to Eddie Howe at his weekly news conference this morning ahead of the trip to Brighton. Of course, there's all sorts of things to be talked about today. Firstly, the transfer window. Will the injury to Sven Botman mean that Newcastle need to dip into it? Eddie Howe said no, we're not going to bring anyone else in. That is why we've got the squad there. We do not think that Sven Botman's injury is serious enough. I don't expect him to play tomorrow at Brighton, I have to say. In all likelihood, I would imagine Dan Burn moves into the left-sided centre-back, and either Matt Targett or Lewis Hall will play at left-back. Probably, I would suggest Matt Targett, given the fact he was given minutes against Liverpool at the weekend, and Lewis Hall, by the sounds of it, was still a little bit off in terms of his fitness, because it's been a bit of a stop-start summer for him. I was out there in America in the summer, watched him a lot in pre-season training. I was following Chelsea as much as Newcastle, and he didn't play too much. He was on the bench kicking his heels, watching on, so he's probably not got the minutes under his belt to come in and be, as they call Eddie Howe, fit for the Newcastle United team. The sort of fitness that we see from the likes of Miguel Almiron and Anthony Gordon at the moment in that Newcastle United first team lineup. So yeah, no more signings. Now normally I would say that's a pretty depressing thing here at Newcastle, given the fact I've stood in this position many times before, but you have to say the business that they have done this window, signing 4 players with time to spare, has been good. I make it a net spend of just round about £100 million, 125 in total if you include the money for the Lewis Hall transfer, which of course will be paid to Chelsea next summer. The sale of Alan St-Maximin of course built into that, meaning that they've spent round about £100 million if you include Hall as a transfer now, but of course that money will go to Chelsea at a later stage. So Eddie Howe really happy with what he's done. I think probably they are just one player short. I think in an ideal world he would have liked to have added one more central defender. He even said today in his news conference, sadly not, they're not adding today. You know what it's like, managers always want to sign players, and I think he would have really liked to, in an ideal world, have added one more player, a central defender, because with Sven Botman looking to be out tomorrow, it does leave Newcastle pretty thin at the back. But you have to say, with Dan Burn able to step in, I know he was at fault for the third Chelsea goal at the weekend, but remember, he's not played that position for a while. He was tired in the game. Nunez was really sharp, he was fresh, and I think that probably played into what happened as well. With the option of him and also Jamal Lascelles in there, I don't think it was a necessity to bring someone in, even though he probably would have liked to. What else did he talk about this morning, Eddie Howe? Of course, he spoke about the draw for the Champions League and the draw for the Carabao Cup in midweek, which of course has been a big story. He was a little bit coy with that. He said, you know, the Man City draw, it is what it is. He said you couldn't make it up, it's been one of these weeks for us. Don't think he was too happy about it, but what can he do? There's no way of redrawing it now, and I think he just realises that Newcastle have to face Manchester City. Perhaps it should have been noticed earlier by someone. It wasn't. It just seems indicative of Newcastle's luck since the start of the season that they're going to play all these big teams early on, even when it comes to the Premier League matches as well. So yeah, a wry smile on his face when I asked him about that this morning. Nothing they can do, he says. He just laughed. He said he just laughed when he read the story afterwards that the Newcastle and Norwich balls had been mistakenly marked with 19 and 20. On then to the Champions League draw, he joked as well, saying that he sat there in silence for an hour afterwards, taking in the magnitude of what had happened and who Newcastle have drawn, and then joked and said, no really, it was only about 10 seconds, but said, look, these are the games we want to test ourselves against. Amazing destinations for the supporters to go to, you know, Milan, Paris and Dortmund, and he said also that I don't think Europe is ready for the invasion of Newcastle United fans, because of course, as he knows, you guys all travel in huge numbers. So yeah, I just sensed an excitement from him, and he said, you know, he just said, let's have it, let's take it on, and you know, like you guys as fans, probably just excited by the challenge that is ahead. And I don't think he'll probably quite realise it until the week arrives, a couple of days before the game, when all the foreign journalists and UEFA delegates come into town. Press conferences before the games will have to be at St James's Park. They'll need to do an open training session at the stadium for both home and away teams before games. Everything's done a lot different in Champions League than it is in the Premier League, and obviously that's something the club are going to have to get used to. He also touched on the Jamal Lascelles incident in town last week, the week before last. He said, we've looked into it. We feel that Jamal was acting in self-defence for himself and his brother, and thankfully they're okay. They were his priority, but also followed it up by saying, look, I don't think my players should be out at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and that probably is a warning to Jamal and the rest of the squad that shouldn't happen. He just said with the amount of games that they've got to play, with the high profile nature of the players that are at the team now, it's not really the right place for them to be in and around, especially on their own without security. So they were the kind of main talking points this morning. Obviously Sven Botman probably the biggest one. We wanted to know if he would be fit. Of course, Eddie never gives it fully away, does he? But my understanding is that Botman is probably going to miss. I think he probably will miss that match against Brighton tomorrow. Having done my ankle ligaments myself over the summer, and I've been getting extensive treatment on it, I'm stood here at the moment 5 weeks later, and 5.5 weeks later, and I still can only walk on it. So look, I know they get significantly better treatment here, and I don't know if Sven's was as bad as mine, but I'd be amazed if he's able to play football 6 days after suffering that, and you'd have to say it's probably a little bit of a risk wary to play. And Newcastle, of course, as I've touched on already, have got options in there. So yeah, quiet deadline day here. Feels a bit weird. I'm stood here just now. What's the time? 5 o'clock. Nothing's happened. Time to go somewhere else, I think, where lots of things are happening. See you on the other side. So here I am at the Academy of Light on the outskirts of Sunderland, the Sunderland training ground. I've come here because Sunderland are, what they would say, doing bits this transfer deadline day. Players leaving, players coming, nothing happening over at Newcastle, and Sunderland obviously a big story in terms of the developments that are taking place today. So I know probably the majority of the people watching this will switch off now, but very, very quickly over here for the first time in a while, to announce the fact Sunderland are losing Ross Stewart today. He's currently completing medical at Southampton ahead of a £10 million move, 8 million plus 2 million in add-ons. Southampton also tried to get Patrick Roberts. They offered £5 million. Sunderland turned it down and Southampton walked away. So Stewart away, Roberts remains. Sunderland have also lost Lyndon Gooch today to Stoke City for around about £1.5 million. He's signing a 2-year deal there. And also Elliot Embleton, who's gone to Derby County on a season-long loan deal. Now, Danny Bath, the central defender, captain last year, player of the year, fans player of the year. He was down or close to agreeing a move to Cardiff. That fell through. I still think he will go tonight. So a number of players leaving Sunderland this transfer deadline day. There were also rumours that Burnley and Liverpool were in for Dan Neil. While he is admired by many clubs, nobody came in for him, and Dan Neil will remain. But I think what the Sunderland fans will want to know, if there are any Sunderland fans watching this, probably not, but is that they are being active today. In the last half an hour, I just caught a glimpse of a blacked out people carrier arriving that had in it their 2 new French signings. They're hoping to complete deals tonight for the 2 of them. 2 young players, both 21 years old, but both have experience in France's top flight. Adil Auchichichi, I think he's called, if my pronunciation is right, midfielder from Lorient, and also a right back called Timothy Pembele, who is signing from PSG. He's played around 15 games for PSG, so he has played at the top level over in France. So they're signing the 2 of those. Also in the door is Ukrainian striker, should I say, Rushin. Natalaski Rushin, his name is. He's not arriving today. He had his medical over in Paris, and on top of that they've got one more signing, and that's Chelsea's Mason Burstow. Trying to remember them all, there's so much going on. So he has arrived on loan from Chelsea until the end of the season. So 4 players in, I'm told potentially 1 more here at Sunderland. Crazy transfer deadline day for them, with at least 4 or 5 maybe going out as well. So crazy times here at Sunderland, all quiet in Newcastle, but obviously that is because that is the way Newcastle wanted it. It's the way Eddie Howe wanted to do his business, and they got all their deals wrapped up early. Newcastle spending £100 million net this transfer window, £125 million in total if you include the Lewis Hall transfer, with that £25 million for his 27 should I say plus 8 being deferred until the end of the season, but then that's been offset slightly by the £25 million they received for Alan St-Maximin. So £100 million spent along the road at Newcastle. Obviously more difficult for Sunderland because they're in the Championship, they don't have the revenues that Newcastle have, but despite that they have been very active, as I say. So unusual one for me being over here. I've not been over here on a deadline day probably since about 2016, but here we are. Hope I've not lost too many followers.